This next session is kindly hosted by LIST, the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, and the topic is Estimating Environmental and Social Impacts of Investments Using Life Cycle Assessment, Green Bonds and Equity Funds. For that, I am pleased we have with us Enrico Benedetto, Head of Sustain Unit, Claudio Petucco, R&T Associate, and Ioana Popescu, PhD candidate.
Thank you very much for the short introduction. It's a long path to come here. So very pleased to be here. I think this is the fourth year that we are presenting at this event, so since the first one. So this evening we want to bring you a fresh perspective on what is being done in the research world about how to assess sustainability of investments. So we are working on this topic now since 4 years. So myself, as was said, I'm heading the research unit, but today you have the actual researchers working on this in this area presenting. So we have Ioana Popescu, who is mainly focusing on equity funds, and Claudio, who is himself a specialist in natural capital assessment and is focusing on green bonds. So we will start with a presentation on the equity funds with a short methodological introduction, very short, just to give the elements to understand. And then we dive deep into the results from our projects. And then we will have another 10 minutes of presentation from Claudio. And then we will keep to reserve 10 minutes at the end for questions and for having an interaction with you. Okay, that's the program. Ioana, please.
Right, so maybe just to make a small introduction into the bigger topic. So what we aim to do during these 4 years is basically to develop methodologies to measure the environmental and social impacts of investment using the method of life cycle assessment. I won't go into detail about life cycle assessment, but you will also have our contacts if you want to hear more about that. So first I will talk about a bit the motivation, then about the life cycle-based indicators adapted to investment funds. And since we talk about equity investment funds, it's a lot about measuring the impacts associated with the companies that the investment funds invest in. And then Claudio will talk about green bonds. So I would say that just to put everything into the context in which we are today, also at European level, I think there are two main issues that we try to tackle with the methodologies that we develop. First of all, it's maybe the lack of clarity at the level of regulations in terms of impacts that should be measured and should be reported on by financial institutions in order to actually achieve the goal of understanding where investments should be better, where money should be better invested in order to really achieve a change. And I would say the second issue would be the fact that there is sometimes a lack of synergy in terms of indicators that are required at the regulations level. So we think that life cycle-based indicators can actually help by providing ready-to-use, first of all, methodologies that are based on scientific developments in the field of industrial ecology, I would say in the first place, but broadly in sustainability assessment, and to use databases that are available and contain information about impacts at industry or product level, and that can be used to estimate impacts of investment products and associated companies where we don't have any information about this. And as we know, the lack of data is one of the big challenges in terms of moving forward on the measurement of impact of financial products. And a big exercise that we did was trying to look at all the indicators that we have, all the indicators and the environmental objectives that we have in the taxonomy, in the CSRD, and in the SFDR, and then to propose life cycle-based indicators that can actually be estimated using specific databases at company level and then at fund level. yeah, we observe, for example, that for climate change, there is, of course, a clear link between impacts and indicators asked, which is not the case for other indicators that maybe are not yet mandatory, but we believe are coming and we believe should be equally important. So what you see in the last column with green are the set of indicators that we actually propose to be estimated at investment product level. Their linkages mainly with the SFDR. And these are based on the EU product environmental footprint methods, which is a method at the EU level that should be used when one wants to understand the environmental sustainability of a product or of an organization. We also did the same exercise for social indicators, even if they are not yet mandatory, they are still under development. We believe it is important to also try to address social issues. And what we see at the regulatory level is that indicators are oftentimes qualitative, and we try to develop more quantitative indicators that are now proposed in the life cycle assessment space. Also in life cycle assessment, social issues are still developing, and of course it's much more complicated to address them, but we propose a first set of indicators that you see also in the last column of the figure. And now I will talk a bit about how we actually estimate these indicators at company level and then at investment fund level. First, by showing you a small snapshot of the database that we create with data for life cycle-based impact indicators. Then I will show you how we can use this data in case studies, first of all, to estimate the impact of sustainability-themed funds, and then to look at what companies drive impact. First, the database. So in the first table, you have what would be a very small sample of companies for which we estimate, in this case, the carbon intensity. We have a paper published in which we disclose the estimates for around 10,000 companies. If you're interested, you can write us and we can send you the link. And then we have the same estimates at fund level. That would be the relative carbon footprint. I think one key benefit of our method is that we can look at scope 3 impacts happening in the supply chain data, which is usually not available from companies and therefore hard to compute at investment fund level. We used this data recently for a study conducted by LSFI together with PwC on the universe of SFDR funds registered in Luxembourg. What you see here, for example, is that the so-called Article 9 funds, what our colleague before said are the best category, actually did rank better than other funds in terms of relative carbon footprint. Though they are the smallest category in terms of number, what you see with the blue dot. However, Article 8 and Article 6 funds did have a quite high carbon footprint associated with them, showing, of course, the fact that it is not, they don't have so strict sustainability requirements when they choose their investments. Here, it's just a snapshot also of how we estimate all the other impact categories for a sample of funds, this time listed on the Luxembourg Green Exchange. Maybe I just want to pinpoint one key finding from this figure. So you have with yellow, or let's say cream, it's the indirect impacts, and with green, the direct impacts associated with the sample of funds. We see that for some indicators like climate change, a lot of impact does come from the direct operations of companies that they invest in, right? So here we could think about electricity generation companies that are still fossil-based. But we see that for some key impacts like biodiversity or water stress, more than 90% of the income comes from the supply chain, leading us to say that it's actually quite important to look at the indirect impacts. And now finally, okay, it's not looking so great, but we try to look at what are the drivers of this really high footprint in terms of water stress. Here we plotted together all the holdings that the sample of 230 funds invest in to try to see which companies are driving the largest share of impact. Quite surprisingly, we saw that 50% of the life cycle impact responsibility, and here we do not correct for double counting, So 50% of the impact could be traced back to 27 very large companies. First of all, from this, we see that funds actually, or equity funds, have quite a large overlap in terms of companies that they invest in. And also there is a small but very significant share of companies that investors could maybe engage with to drive sustainability. In the case of water, the big share that you see there with gray is companies from the fast-moving consumer goods sector, which of course would be then connected in their supply chain to agriculture processes that are highly water intensive. I would close just with two small key take-home messages. First of all, that our model, but of course also other models based on estimation of impact, are key for the sustainable finance industry, because even if companies do not yet report all the sustainability data needed, we can actually estimate it, and investors can understand and can see in a first phase where the impacts are coming from. And second of all, there are important trade-offs between indicators, which can actually be detrimental to the investment decision-making process and should be taken into account. This was for myself for the fund side, so I will leave Claudio now to talk about the green bonds.
Thank you, Joanna, and good afternoon, everyone. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to present the results of the research focusing on environmental impact on green bonds. And the first question we want to answer is that, can we trust the disclosed values in terms of avoided emissions? So we try to answer this question using life cycle assessment and try to use public available data to verify or to compare our estimation with what was reported in the post-issue reports of green bonds. Then I will like to show you other interesting application of life cycle assessment, namely the possibility to compute an environmental cost effectiveness and supporting the do not significant harm principle. And finally, I would like to share some lessons learned during these 4 years of research. So our objective in this study was basically to move from the left to the right, so from the green bond to the green bond environmental assessment. And to do so, we started by collecting data. We analyzed 2 samples of green bonds. One was the European Investment Bank green bond, and the other one was the corporate green bonds present in the data hub of the Luxembourg Green Exchange in February 2022. So we frozen the sample back then. Then we start looking at the project that those bonds were financing, and we went through the post-issuance reports in order to build a database of characteristic and specific KPI of all the projects financed by the green bonds. And we used that database and we tried to match it with the project data from the life cycle inventory. We used database ecoinvent, and then we defined a typology of project and we tried to match it with a baseline, and I will talk about this in a minute. And once, by doing that, we managed to have a life cycle impact assessment at the project level that was then attributed and allocated to the green bond by the share of financing. As you may all know, all the communication reports about the environmental KPI are centered on the idea of avoided impacts and in the specific greenhouse gas emission. So the figure on the left shows the avoided impact, how they are computed. Basically, you have, for instance, your project that is delivering tot kilowatt hours per year, and then you look at what are the carbon emission to produce that amount of kilowatt hour per year, and you compare it with the baseline. Basically, what is the in that country and in that year, what was the emission on average used to produce the same amount of energy, of electricity. So this was that there is actually no consensus, and you can understand that the choice of the baseline can largely affect the avoided emission reported, right? And there is no consensus in the literature and nor among green bond issuers regarding how to choose these baseline scenarios. So we, for instance, compare the green bar is the baseline used by AIB with what that accounts for scope 1 and scope 2 emissions with our baseline, so baseline computed from LCA, and using scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And for instance, I would like just to show you how much it can change even within the LCA world. So using best knowledge, if we look at the attributional scenario, what we call the average energy mix, taking into account what is actually coming out from the plug today, versus the marginal mix. So in the hypothesis in which the new project is actually displacing new technology at the margin, so with lower environmental impact and therefore less polluting technologies. The second question and principle I would like to look is how far are the declared avoided emission from the issuers in their reports from what we could compute using publicly available data. And if you look at the graph, basically in the horizontal axis, you have what is declared by the issuer, so that are total CO2 emission per year, versus the vertical axis, what we estimated. And for larger renewable energy projects, we can say that they are doing pretty well. We conveniently printed 45-degree lines. It means the closer you are to the line, the closer the two our estimate and the reported figures are. But if we zoom in on smaller projects that are not very visible on the larger picture, we could see that there is not a clear trend. Overall, I would say that there is a tendency from the issuer to overestimate the avoided emissions. And another interesting fact is that if you look at those numbers on the vertical axis, those are actually mistakes in the report. I think there the issuer forgot to put a K in the table, because if you multiply those numbers by 1,000, you will move all these points very close to the 45-degree line. So always verify the numbers before printing the report. In the next slide, this is an interesting result that I would like to share with you. So here we take the same emission as in the previous data, and we divide it by the total cost of the project, right? And to make it even more understandable and to scale it, we normalize the emission per €1,000,000 by the annual emission of a European citizen. So what you can read in the vertical axis is actually the amount of European citizens, so the amount of emission produced by, for instance, 50, 100 European citizens. So on average, in our sample here, you see 3 distributions, and each distribution uses a different baseline, but more or less the take-home message is that there is no much difference across the scenarios that we tested. But if we look at the average scenario, the central one, every dot is a project, right? The average emission per €1,000,000 is about equivalent to the emission of 55 to 62 European citizens in the sample of corporate bond that we analyzed. But what is even more interesting, I think, is that if we look at the range of projects, so the performance, the cost effectiveness of this project can vary by a factor of 6, meaning that it is possible and use this data to pinpoint and select where our investment is more productive in terms of fighting climate change. Another interesting application of life cycle assessment is the possibility, as Joanna presented, to look impacts beyond carbon. Basically, here we present the impacts per €1,000,000 scaled by the equivalent impact produced by a European citizen, one of us, on average. And the first column is what I showed you before. It's very tiny. But if we look at the second column we can see that the impacts can be large, and many projects are beneficial. But we need also to be careful, because for some projects, and you can see the 0 value there, they are performing for other environmental indicators. So, for instance, freshwater ecotoxicity, marine ecotoxicity, metal depletion, they are performing worse than the actual baseline. So basically violating the do no significant harm principle. Another interesting fact is how informative is the post-issuance reporting. Well, we started, as I said, freezing the sample last year in February 2022. And back then we had about 1,600 green bonds, corporate green bonds. 45% of it did not have a post-issuance report available in the data hub. And 48% had a report, but the report was done by aggregating information by project category, and they did not disclose information at the project level. Only 89 corporate green bonds actually had information at the project level, but only 31 provided all the set of information needed for us to match their data with our life cycle impact database. This is about 2% of the initial sample. Those 31 bonds were financing 192 projects, just for information, mostly on renewable energy and clean transportation projects. So poor disclosure, unfortunately, result in higher uncertainty. Just to show you briefly in this slide is that sometimes we not have enough information from the post-issuance report, and we have to make assumptions. And to understand the impact of this assumption, we basically evaluate all possibilities. For instance, to give you an example that maybe clarifies it better, in a clean transportation project, we knew, for instance, the number of cars, and we knew in which country this was happening, but we didn't have information of which type of fleet was replaced. Was it large vehicles, small vehicles, diesel vehicles, gasoline vehicles? We didn't know. And then what we did is we tried to do all the combination and see how variable was the result. And as you can see, the variability in the clean transportation could be a lot. This is scaled by the actual baseline. So we could have, for certain category, ranging between doing 100% better than the baseline to minus 1,000%. So we couldn't really make any final statement. But I would like to add a positive note. While there was uncertainty generated by poor reporting, especially, as said, for principal adverse indicators, I would say the issuer that we analyzed did a great job in estimating the greenhouse gases emission avoided by the green bonds. We tested, here you can say there is a small tendency of our computed LCA emission to be lower than the declared one, but overall, we run statistical tests and the difference is not significant. So at least for climate change impacts for this small set of bonds, the reports are trustworthy. I would like to end on this slide, wrapping up our experience. So I must say that personally it was a difficult journey. I had to sail in a kind of hunted sea of non-standardized post-issuer reports, meaning PDFs, and find information by reading PDFs. It was very hard to extract information automatically. But we tried to summarize and provide some guidance to improve the disclosure process and the transparency to reduce the risk of greenwashing. And so it's very important if you want to be able, investors and the public, to validate the results provided in the post-issue reports, to provide data for each project at the project level, provide project cost and project percentage of financing. Very often I had to search the net to get the total project cost, and provide the relevant KPI and the baseline assumption used. We then also come up with a table. I don't have time to go through it right now, but with minimal data requirements that we recommend to be disclosed in order to let a third party to validate the result in green bond reporting. Thank you very much for your attention. And I also want to thank, the FNR for financing this project.
Thank you. Yes, it's working. Well, wow, a lot of results. So you've just seen some of the, I think, without being too, let's say, ambitious, some of the most advanced results of the application of LCA and life cycle-based metrics, scientific metrics to sustainable finance. So we have still plenty of time for questions. I'm sure you will have questions. Yes, the lady.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just curious to understand how you monitor scope 3 emission, because you said that you are able to track them and compute them quite precisely. So I was just wondering how.
Yes, so they are based on estimation methods, of course, so we cannot know specifically for each company what specific scope 3 emissions it has or what supply chain it has, but what we do is that we look at what is the average supply chain of a certain industry in a certain country. Let's say we have Volkswagen that produces cars, or better to say, we know that Volkswagen has revenue from producing cars, and this revenue comes from France, Romania, China. And then we know, based on the life cycle databases and specifically input-output life cycle assessment in our case, what is the average emissions happening over the supply chain of producing cars in China and in Romania and in France would be a different number. So let's say the value would be, on average, there are 300 tons of CO2 happening per million euro of cars manufactured in country X. And this is the value that we can then plug into the company profile to, let's say, estimate its supply chain. I hope it was clear enough. Okay.
So thank you very much for this explanation, which were clear, indeed. So my name is Laurence Henry, and I am coming from the manufacturing industry. I find your work very interesting. It's very complex and very difficult. I see two partners working together, the stock exchange, the green stock exchange, and the researchers, so the scientists. I am wondering if you could have access to the third partner. I mean the engineers, the crafting people, and from which stage you started the cooperation, because these people are using LCA softwares for years. They are even building the softwares.
Yes, thank you for your question. Indeed, we are working with an industry since 20 years, and we came to the finance only over the 4 last years. The point is that indeed they are working a lot on LCA, they are developing this, but always with a focus at the product, technology, or a company level, let's say. A company level is quite recent.
Yes, company level, I think, and car makers, OEM levels. Huh? So taking in account every impact on the environment and on the resources, you took care to the health, which is important, toxicity, about the emissions themselves globally on the complete value chain. That's a big challenge, and to go in details on this topic. And I think if you have the right partner for the crafting industry, you should have access to more data. And it will be for us, and especially for finance people, very helpful at the end.
We are very open. We are very open to work in that direction. What we experience is that indeed the data are available, so detailed study for specific supply chains for the specific industry are available.
Yes, Stellantis has got for years this kind of data. Volkswagen also, BMW also, all they worked a lot.
Absolutely.
Maybe for 30 years already.
And the chemical industry as well, and the aluminium, the steel
Exactly,
industry.
the glass industry, also the steel industry, they have got a lot.
Yeah.
And to compare and to add this information, it should make, at the end, the big picture easier. And if you have maybe a good big picture coming from the right sources, you can find the pathway to build efficient KPIs.
Absolutely. The point is that the data exist, but are not available, are not disclosed.
They are not disclosed, absolutely.
So we have two extremes. We have the high detail, which is available but not disclosed. And then on the other side, we have the input-output tables, input-output database that are national level per sector, where, let's say, the data have very different, let's say, are quite dishomogeneous.
Yes.
and of course at a sectorial level.
Yeah.
So an aggregation in theory of the data that would exist but are not available.
So I spoke about a value chain, a supply chain. I would say a human chain of experts coming with data and information in each field, in each stage of the project, to bring the value. And people will help you, not the global figures and the official reports.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for
Welcome.
Other question? We have 40 seconds or even... yes, there is a lady there. I think, unless I missed...
Hello, thank you a lot. Actually, I just finished my master in financial law. I wonder if at this stage, if there is a label or a certification on, for example, a sustainable investment bonds, sustainable bond, for example. Because actually, as I have seen, is that everything is based on self-assessment. So whether is there a project or in the near future in the Luxembourgish level or in European level?
Thank you. So I think, yeah, while for funds it's maybe a bit more clear and a lot of standards or labels are being developed for green bonds and for bonds or sustainability-linked bonds, I think I'm not an expert in law, but I would say my subjective opinion, I think it is more towards the voluntary side. Then also at EU level, we saw the EU green bond standards that is still voluntary. So I think this makes it a bit hard also to have access to good data and to expect issuers to put good data out there when they are not required to. But hopefully, we will see a standard developing soon and also at global scale. Yeah, from what I know and talking to other people, it's the issuers themselves who are now trying to define what are best indicators and what is their priority and what they think would be best, which of course makes it very hard for an investor then to compare different bonds when they are actually not reporting on the same set of indicators. They don't have the same understanding of the issue. Yeah, I would leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much to Enrico, Claudio, and Joanna for joining us as speakers today. And thank you to Liz for hosting this session.